What were the issues that the early medieval church had to deal with? In our previous episode, we looked at Councils 1 to 3 and a lot of the Christological controversies. We're going to continue that on this conversation of Theology on Air. I'm Evan McClanahan, pastor at First Lutheran. I'm joined once again, as I was in the previous episode, by Evan Friske. You can find him at Missio Dei Anglican Church. You can find him at Theology by the Pint events. And Theology on Air, as a reminder, is an outgrowth of Theology by the Pint, which amazingly you can find at theologybythepint.org. It's just Evan and I today. If you're watching on video, somehow we're both wearing the same color blue jeans and black shirts.
It's Lent. This is our Lenten outfit.
It's this is all we wear for 46 days during Lent, even on Sunday. So anyway, but for those of you listening, you don't care. But sorry, Sarah could not be here. She is taking advantage of spring break and visiting family. But Sarah would want me to tell you to go to theologybythepint.org, come to our live events, held monthly, interesting conversations around theological, ethical, philosophical issues around craft beer. And if you pay an extra $5 and come at 7:30 or 6:30 rather, you get food. So it's a pretty good deal. $15, dinner and a show, and 2 beers. It's like free money, So check it out, theologybythepint.org. This podcast is where we can dive a little bit deeper, and these 2 episodes are about the councils, the early councils of the church, the early controversies of the church, dealing with the nature of Christ. I mean, issues we, in some sense, have resolved, but in some sense, they keep cropping up because a lot of it has to deal with our understandings of humanity and what the human being is, and the soul, and in the soul's interaction with the body, and all of that. So it's been really interesting. I trust if you're listening to this episode, you've already listened to part 1, where we're looking at the early councils of the church. So let's just keep diving in. I'm going to assume we've laid groundwork in terms of incarnation, in terms of Councils 1 to 3, and but not everything was resolved. The last time we kind of left off, we were talking about the Nestorian controversy. So this was a bishop in Constantinople who was opposed by a finger-wagging layman. Who the issue was Theotokos, that's Mary, the mother of God, and that was about Jesus, not about Mary. But basically saying that Jesus, from his conception, was God in the belly, in the womb of Mary. So that says more about Jesus than Mary. But that said, they are fine, as we said, with the Trinity formulation of one being 3 persons. Yep. They're fine with Jesus being a person and having 2 natures. Okay, Orthodox theology says that Jesus is one person with 2 natures, human and divine, but they are sort of perfectly merged in what's called the hypostatic union. So that's Orthodox theology. The Nestorians said they rejected, I guess you might say, the hypostatic union.
Correct.
Okay, and so they said actually he is two persons.
Right.
So does that mean that they believed in 4 persons of the Trinity?
No, because the human Jesus wasn't part of the Trinity.
Oh, okay. He's just like on the sideline.
Right, he was just this.
He was like some poor guy who got drug in.
He was just a link to the Trinity, and I don't know, there was just a weak link that established an interaction, a special interaction that they thought would lead to our salvation. But everybody else disagreed.
Okay. What are the years, by the way, in these councils?
So that 3rd council is 431.
Okay. So
as a consequence, the Syrian Christians and the Persian Christians left. And that generally includes the Arabian Peninsula as well.
Meaning they were like, peace out. Nice to know you. We're Nestorian. You read the Bible wrong. Right. Your philosophy is bad. We're Nestorian from here on out.
Right. They really wanted to say if Jesus is not 2 natures, then the humanity can't be saved. And the rest of the church was saying that you're like this discussion of 2 natures, you're pulling him apart so far that you're removing the gospel. Like this, it's no longer here anymore.
Gotcha. Okay, but does that church still exist?
Technically, yes, although they are converting in droves to Roman Catholicism.
Today?
Today.
Oh, okay.
So they...
I mean, I guess part of my thought was, well, did they not essentially disappear with the Muslim conversion, right? Because Iran...
So most of them did historically, yeah. So the idea of God only having a very weak connection with man has no problem with Islam.
Okay.
So the idea that
Jesus in Islam is a prophet,
right?
So same kind of connection, right?
So they were already denying that Mary was not or Mary was not the mother of God. So it made it very easy to say, well, Jesus wasn't God. That was a human Jesus. And whatever connection he had to God was different. And then over time, this very quickly developed into a kind of Unitarianism.
Okay.
That especially as Muhammad began conquering, it was an easy conversion.
Gotcha.
It was not difficult.
It's easy. It's interesting too. Just as you mentioned before, we're not ever talking about the Spirit. It's like once you reject the divinity,
Right.
the divine nature of Christ, it's like the Spirit just falls by the wayside. It's interesting. You don't see people going, "Hey, wait a minute. No, I don't. I think just Jesus guy. Because the Spirit doesn't have the problem, if you will, of becoming flesh."
Right.
I mean, if part
it has to do with physicality.
yeah.
Yep.
So if the issue is that God can't become flesh because flesh is dirty and we have this kind of Gnosticism lurking in the background, well, the Spirit doesn't have that problem.
Right.
So why can't the Spirit? Why can't it? Why is it a Trinity or a unity?
So interesting. There were Binitarians that existed,
Okay.
but it was always Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit was just like a divine
Okay.
force.
That's interesting.
Yeah. It just historically it never worked the other way.
I mean, there's not a lot of texts about the proof text, you might say, for the divinity of the Spirit.
Right.
To be fair, I guess. Not that I really want to be fair to non-Trinitarians, but you do not grieve the Spirit, and the Spirit is spoken of as a person, and the unity of the Jesus gives the Spirit the advocate and things like that. So, okay, but we're not here to necessarily prove the divinity of the Spirit. I'm just find it interesting as a placeholder.
So Council 3 ends.
Yeah.
The Syrian and Persian bishops leave, and they continue in their Christianity, but ultimately are overrun later in history. The fights within the Roman Empire did not end though. So now the struggle was: does Jesus have two natures or one mixed combo nature? So you have more fancy terms. You have duophysites and you have miaphysites, as well as still like a reemergent of a monophysite that Jesus only had a divine nature that comes back.
Okay.
The physis being the Greek word for nature, and then duo is two, mia is united, and then mono is one.
Oh, okay.
So
okay.
So
what am I? What should I be?
You should be, from my perspective, duophysite. So there are two natures.
Okay.
The two natures
that was my answer. So
yeah, the two natures are not mixed.
Okay.
They are united into a person, and it's the person that holds the two natures together. But the two natures don't need to mix.
Okay, so that would be the problem with miaphysites.
Right. So
that it mixes the natures.
Right. So it says that God, specifically the second person, because they have no problem with the Trinity, took humanity into himself, and thus has a hybrid nature of a sort.
Man, sometimes I just want to be an idiot, and just be like, Jesus is God because the Bible says so. Anyway, okay. Jesus loves me. This I know. I just think that to myself.
Yeah, it was way easier back when I was 7.
It's like the meme with like Julia Roberts, and like the physics calculations. It's like that's kind of how I feel sometimes. Okay. All right. And the monophysite, is that Apollinarianism?
So Apollinarianism would just be like the version of this before these councils.
Okay.
So they didn't speak about the physis of God in any sort of unified way quite yet, and that was part of the problem. That's why they needed these councils, because it ends up having consequences to it.
Okay.
So the part of the disappointing fact, especially in Chalcedon, that's Council 4. It's only 20 years later. The bishops of the empire are still fighting like nobody's business, and it almost entirely divides on language. So all of the churches that left on Ephesus were Syriac, Aramaic speaking, or other, and then likewise there's another split after Chalcedon. So you get non-Chalcedonians that are that speak Egyptian, so Coptic, Armenian, or Ethiopian are generally the bigger ones. And then after Chalcedon, spoiler, the Orthodox Christianity is only left with Latin and Greek.
Okay.
And so some of this is often approached of maybe there was a language barrier, and there's been a lot of talks of Eastern Orthodoxy to try to unite back with the Miaphysite churches that left. Those talks actually broke down in the 90s, though.
Oh, interesting.
There's no progress that's been made in 30 years on them, which is kind of disappointing. But they agree that a lot of the excommunications in particular were done because of misunderstanding of language.
Oh, interesting.
So the fourth council is entirely because of the third, and in the third council there is a very popular bishop that does use the phrase united nature, so miaphysis.
Yeah.
And that is quoted constantly from what is called the Oriental Orthodox.
Okay.
So this is extra confusing because we have Eastern Orthodox and Church of the East that are not the same, but Oriental Orthodox is also not the same, and Orient means East in Latin.
Yeah,
So
gotcha.
it's just not, it's not easy. We have three Eastern groups of churches.
The Ethiopian Orthodox is not in fellowship with Eastern Orthodox, for example.
Correct.
And it's Nestorian, right?
No, so these ones are the Miaphysites.
Oh, okay.
So it's the Assyrian church that are the Nestorians.
Okay, okay. So the Ethiopian, we have an Ethiopian church at an evangelical church at our facility. So I know the Ethiopians well, and they don't, they don't agree on these issues with the Orthodox Church in Ethiopia. Right. Although the Orthodox Ethiopian Church does claim to have the Ark of the Covenant, I believe.
They still do, yes.
Yeah. Okay. So
they still claim it. Let me specify.
That would be pretty cool. Yeah. That would be pretty cool, but I don't know. Okay. All right. So what's next? I guess.
So that council makes no sense in a vacuum to me at all, and that was part of my reason why I got so interested in this. Why is this so important? Do I need to be Chalcedonian or non-Chalcedonian? Like, because churches literally split over this issue, and I can barely understand what's going on.
Yeah,
I'm sure that plenty of us are in this boat right now as we're explaining this. It does not make sense. So one of the things.
Well, let me just stop and just say, does the Bible really talk about this? You know, to this. I mean, I'm sure there are a few texts. I mean, but
so directly, no. Ultimately, this is going to loop back to Councils 1 and 2. This is going to loop back to what is our view of God and the Trinity.
Okay.
And that's the interesting portion that I found here. Is by the time we get to at least Council 6, Council 7 is also ecumenical, but it's dealing with worship instead. By the time we get to the end of Council 6, it actually is making inroads onto what we believe is the Trinity. And lo and behold, I think the Chalcedonian position is the consistent position and lines up with the first two better. I don't see this in a vacuum.
Stop. Yet. Okay. For the audience and for my own sake. What is the result of the Chalcedonian Council?
The Chalcedon says that there are two natures of Christ united in that one personal union, hypostatic union.
Okay, and so that's hypostatic union.
So unlike the other councils, there was a lot of disagreement.
Okay, so you would say Chalcedon agrees with 1 and 2. Okay.
Correct.
4 agrees with 1 and 2. Council 4 agrees with 1 and 2.
Right.
Gotcha. But there was a lot of people who went who left that council and said, nope, we're out. We're taking our toys and throwing them out of the pram. You know, we're going our separate ways.
Yeah. So if human nature is brought into divine nature, like is humanity now divine? It gets into do I become a God in my salvation? Because that's how we were unified with God, is by being pulled into his nature and forming a new hybrid nature. It starts to beg some of those questions. And like, I gave them legitimate thought that like maybe this is actually a better system of salvation. It solves a lot of our Western debates at the very least, by emphasizing unity over all the other mechanisms that we have available to us. Notably, that the Oriental Orthodox don't get into this either. They do believe in a kind of theosis, but it seems to fit the same as the Eastern Orthodox. So the Oriental
define theosis.
Theosis literally means becoming God, but it's not as literal as you might think, especially in Eastern Orthodox Christianity. The Eastern Orthodox do think that we divinize into our glorified state, and that this is a process. This takes time, and that is the salvation. Like that's ultimately your destination is to divinize in that way.
Yeah, they would basically view the West tends to view the fall into sin as sort of total, absolute, just the worst thing you could ever imagine. The break with God is final, whereas the East, when we say East now, we're talking about Eastern Orthodox. So those who would be pro Chalcedon, right?
Right.
Pro everything we talked about with the Trinity. Okay, not the Iranians, not the Ethiopians. Okay. Iran didn't exist. Persians. Okay.
Persians.
Yeah.
Sassanids.
Yeah. But they, I lost my train of thought. They would say that at the fall, man was wounded.
Right.
And basically, church, which is the kingdom of God on earth, is where you receive something like medicine. And so you are tended to wholeness, and so you grow in holiness and more kind of godlike over time. So in the West, we tend to think of these things more like categorically.
Right.
They we're kind of linear, and they're kind of like some kind of holistic, process that's kind of not quite definable. Whereas we're like, no, justification happens now, and then you're sanctified, and then when you die, you're glorified now. Whereas in the East, those categories are, it's like Matthew McConaughey at the end of Interstellar. It's like, well, time happens now, but it also happens now at the same time. So, sorry, that was dumb. But
hey guys, Sarah here. Sorry to interrupt what I'm sure is an amazing podcast episode, but I just wanted to tell you that Theology by the Pint is growing. We are now a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and we're expanding. This coming year, with your help, we'll grow our reach by adding events in multiple Houston suburbs, as well as launch a youth version. Don't worry, those will be pints of iced coffee, not beer. We're adding follow-up conversations to reach the spiritually curious and the unchurched. We're also growing our connections and partnerships with more local churches, and you can help us grow by praying for us, by telling your friends or church about us, and of course, by partnering with us financially. To donate, go to theologybythepint.org/give. If each of our podcast listeners gave $100, we would reach our annual budget right then. Consider donating today. Okay, enjoy the rest of the show.
So the fall is not as bad, and the solutions are theosis, or which again isn't saying that man actually becomes God, but like the merger of God and man becomes such that man grows in holiness, and we agree with that. Like Luther talked about union with Christ.
Yeah. So Jordan B. Cooper has a whole like Lutheran theosis thing. Yeah. That he's pushing.
We do believe the Spirit indwells in us. Right. So there are ways of talking about these things where, like, I don't know, we kind of mean different things with different words and whatnot, but we should not be hostile to the idea that we do grow in holiness. Right. Sanctification literally is the word holy. Sanctus holy. So the Holy Spirit resides within us, and if we grow in holiness, that does mean we are more like God. Yeah, by definition. So because that's the standard to which we're going.
Right. Okay. Politically, the empire just lost like half of his lands by doing this. Okay. And so the other two councils are attempts to pull them back.
Okay. So you're saying after Chalcedon.
After Chalcedon, there's two more councils.
Because you've got the north, say, again, Persia and whatnot. Mm-hmm. Okay, so like kind of northeast Europe and Asia. And then you've got the south into Africa. You're saying they're like broke off.
Right.
And when we say empire, are we talking about what? The Roman Empire?
Yeah. So the Eastern Roman, the remnants of the Eastern Roman Empire. Okay. So at this stage, the Western Empire doesn't exist anymore. Okay. Those northern Germanic tribes that converted to Arianism had actually taken over most of France, most of Spain, and most of northern Africa.
When do we want to look at a map?
Actually, we can look at that map now. That map would be useful. So this is what Christianity looked like after Chalcedon, after the splits. You'll have
and for our listening audience, we
forgot Jerusalem. That was the one.
Oh, the Jerusalem Council?
No, the Patriarchate of Jerusalem.
Did you make that map?
No, I did not.
Okay. Well, what it is it's a map of Europe, Northern Africa, and what we would call the Middle East, and England. And different colors represent the See of Rome, meaning essentially the Roman Catholic, what we'd call the Roman Catholic Church's influence, the See of Constantinople, the See of Antioch. Oh, yeah, Jerusalem. You're saying the
right.
There are 5 seats of the church: Constantinople, Antioch, Jerusalem.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
Alexandria. Jerusalem was the very one we forgot, which is crazy because the church literally begins at Pentecost in Jerusalem. Okay. And so Rome is the only one in the west. The other four are considered in the east.
And if you notice all of the yellow, honestly, that might be, they might need a lot of hash marks in there.
If you're listening on podcast, I'm sorry, but either find this map and we're trying to describe it. It's a map of 459 CE, or go to our YouTube page and watch it. We'll try to explain it, but yeah. So
there are a lot of Aryans on the west side.
A whole bunch of yellow Aryans in like half of Spain, the southwestern corner of what we call France, and a big chunk of northwestern France. Basically all of Germany up into the Scandinavian countries.
Yep.
If my geography is correct.
The Vandals were the group that took over Spain at this time from Western Rome, because Western Rome could not defend it.
Gotcha.
They also took over all of Northern Africa.
Gotcha.
So notably, Northern African bishops are in exile at this point on, that because it's controlled by Arian bishops, and they were persecuted and they would have been killed if they would have stayed.
Gotcha. Interesting.
So yeah, Rome is having major problems.
Yeah. Okay, and then we've got you've got a little bit of Celtic Christianity.
Right.
St. Patrick, he did his best. By the way, St. Patrick's Day is what? Sunday, I think. Okay.
This might be pre-St. Patrick, but the Celtic Christianity would be syncretic. So it's mixing in all of the Celtic paganism alongside Christianity in a way that just wasn't authentic according to any of the churches at the time.
Gotcha. Yeah. And the Church of the East is this group that we had mentioned already. So, so what we call Roman Catholic, it's interesting. I would have assumed it would have been all of Europe, and so forth.
Right. No, Christianity did not grow fast.
Gotcha. So 459 CE, or AD, as some people like to call it. Me. Basically, you do have huge Aryan swaths. Huge. I mean, like I said, all of Germany into kind of getting into Eastern Europe a little bit. Anyway, big chunk of Spain, and Northern Africa.
Yeah, okay. It's surprising Aryan influence going on in the West, and so Rome is absolutely a backwater in almost every way you can describe. Yeah. And so one of the fun canons of Chalcedon, they have 30 statements, that things you must believe in order to be a Christian in good standing, according to Chalcedon. Number 28 specifically says that the powers and primacy of the Bishop of Rome is now transferred to Constantinople.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so Rome does not like that one.
Oh, well, yeah, I would think not.
They don't like that one at all.
I mean, granted, the Pope is not as powerful in 459 as he will become, but pretty established by now.
Right.
Yeah.
So the Pope is absolutely being replaced by the Bishop of Constantinople formally at this stage.
Interesting.
That first among equals is Constantinople, according to Council of Chalcedon.
Gotcha. Explain that. So the idea of the first among equals, going back to the 5 seats that we mentioned earlier, the idea, what Rome kind of came out and said, Roman supremacy, because Peter, being the apostle of Christ, the great apostle of Christ, the designated leader of the early church, since he is bestowed in John 21, he is restored to his ministry after denying Christ, and on this rock I will build my church. And since he dies in Rome as the first bishop of Rome, the story goes, we would dispute this, but basically the Roman church has supremacy. So granted, it's a supremacy among equals, but it's still a supremacy. Yeah. Okay. So that's where the papacy comes from and all that.
Yep. So and you can also notice that the Rome is technically in control of modern day Greece. That changes as well. So that they make political decisions, I guess this isn't really political, but at this time, there's not a whole lot of separations. They make ecclesial decisions on what bishops govern where.
Yeah.
And so Rome gets that taken away in Council 5 as well.
When do the Arians kind of get beat up? I mean, at some point, Rome does take over all of Spain, all of France, all of Northern Europe.
It takes a long time, and honestly, that you get conquest of Islam in Spain before you get the Arians rooted out.
Okay, interesting.
Yep.
Interesting.
Fun stuff.
Yeah.
So, and also for reference, that's 459. The Vikings don't convert until the late 900s through the 1300s. So, yeah, there's hundreds of years where Northern Europe is pagan.
Yeah. And now it's pagan once again. Sorry. Okay. All right. Gotcha. Okay. Well, yeah, people should check out that map, kind of see where we're at. Now, where is the break? I mentioned earlier, are we done with the map? Or
Yeah, we can be done with that.
where is the break with when people will say in our world, in evangelical world, they'll say something like, "Well, I agree with the first blank councils." Is it 7?
Usually, it's the first 7 are for your more traditionalist Christians. They'll say the first 7. The fact that they know what the councils are at all, I bet you they say 7.
Gotcha.
So and these are ones where all bishops from all over the world were invited.
Okay, so that does become an issue later.
Yeah, because there are smaller councils that happened during this time. For instance, the Syrian Christians that left to form the Church of the East, they had their own council because they felt left out of the Council of Ephesus.
Gotcha.
And so they call them robber councils occasionally too. Arians had their own councils.
Yeah.
In response to councils, they all would do these things.
Yeah.
And there's a fun Council of Orange, for instance, that happens after Augustine to say that Augustine just came off way too strong.
Yeah.
There are 13 bishops and they're all French. It's really hard to call that ecumenical or use that as an authority. The ecumenical councils are seen as more authoritative because this is all the world coming together. Specifically the educated bishops that have access to the texts, which are not common. You have to handwrite the Bible. You're not getting a lot of copies of the Bible. They get all of these people to gather in one place and discuss what is the religion, what do we actually believe here. It's the first 2 are Trinity. The next 4 are Jesus, Christology, and then the last one is worship, and particularly whether we can use icons. So you can't call them idols. Idols is definitely forbidden, but icons. At the end of Council 4, we get all of these splits. It's really hard to see the practical ramifications. And they only show up over time. The Emperor of Rome is always the one calling these councils. And so Council 5 is called in order to condemn some theologians that were seen as Nestorian. And they were hopeful that this would encourage Miaphysites, that that we could have 2 non-Nestorian groups and that they can come together and unify again. That they really wanted to condemn these theologians. There is a lot of drama with the Roman pontiff again. He refuses to attend and doesn't want to condemn these theologians. The formal official reasoning for this is that the three chapters, it's called the 3 chapters. The 3 chapters were written by people that had already died, and to anathematize people after they died had never been done before. Yeah. They never excommunicated somebody from beyond the grave. So that's the official reason. The unofficial reason is that the Pope was dealing with a lot of other problems. Yeah. Those large swaths of Arians were still there. Yeah. He was with the 5th council. He refused to go, and the emperor kidnapped him, drug him there, and kept him in a prison for 8 years. A nice prison. Oh, okay. Kept him in prison for 8 years until he ratified it.
Like he had one of those ankle monitors,
yeah.
So, gotcha.
Medieval ankle monitor.
I mean, sometimes some of these old, Galileo was in prison, but he was in an Italian villa that any of us would, spend $5,000 a night to stay in. So, whatever. By the way, I was just thinking of looking up for a YouTube video. I can vouch for it because I watched it. It was put out by a Reformed Baptist. It's called The Failure of Eastern Orthodoxy, so not to offend all of our Eastern Orthodox friends. But I think it's a pretty good video. It's 2 hours long. It's on YouTube. You can watch it. But it talks a lot about how declarations are made at small councils where there's just not enough people to, justify, just because a council says it doesn't mean it's true.
Right. So the 5th council is dubious for a couple of reasons. One, the reason it was called is to try to enlarge the empire, which is weird. Yeah. And there were a lot of political things that were done. So we were radically expanding the number of canons that are declared as well. So the Third Council has 12, but no new creed. There's no new creeds after technically the Fourth Council restates the creeds of Councils 1 and 2. And so that's the official council creed that we use. The Nicene Creed is actually the refined and pretty version that was created at Chalcedon.
Gotcha. Okay.
There's also some dubious doctrines that are demanded for weird reasons in the Fifth Council. The big one is Mary's perpetual virginity. That they declared that Mary is forever virgin, and they really wanted to condemn other theologians as well. So Origen is condemned at Council 5. So pre-existence of souls in particular was condemned. The only theological value that I found while going through this is there's some Scythian monks that were really into the idea that one of the Trinity suffered, and that phrase was canonized. And that actually simultaneously combats a lot of things. You can't be an Arian. You can't be a monophysite, because if God only had one nature, right? You can't be a Pelagian, because it's the suffering of God that matters. And so it targets a lot of things at the same time.
So just that one phrase.
That one phrase, honestly, as far as theology goes, that seems to be nice and important, and nice continual build of the theology. And everything else seems to be very political and is super fun from a historical and political perspective. But
and I don't want to oversimplify, but as the Roman Empire collapses, what's kind of there to take its place, and you've got the Christian Church, although from that map it wasn't, and people, by the way, dispute the let's just say there's not a universally accepted year or time that the Rome officially collapsed. It took
it was slow.
Took centuries to build. Arguably, took centuries to collapse. But the church is there in its place, and so I think for the next 1,000 years, arguably until the Reformation, you basically have massive jockeying for power between secular rulers, kings, and church authorities, popes and whatnot, who had the authority to cast them into hell.
Right.
So the king is like, well, I can come and storm this. And the pope is like, well, I can send you into hell. So, so you have some pretty famous stalemates between kings and popes and bishops and princes and all of that.
Right.
So, so getting the politics out of this gets really hard. After
historically,
500.
I don't know if they saw a whole lot of difference between religion and politics in a lot of these scenarios. So,
for sure. I mean, I think
it's a very American idea of ours that religion and politics are separated.
Right.
Historically, that doesn't seem to be the case very often.
Right. Well, and I would argue that in many ways, God and government should not be separated. Religion and politics, more so. Yes, for sure.
Okay.
But ultimately, we ultimately have an ultimate standard, and that was a lot of the use of the word ultimate, but we do have ultimate standards, and those essentially function as our religions. And if we don't argue for Christianity in the public square, then a secular humanist will argue for secular humanism in the public square.
Right.
I think one of those has to win. It's inevitable, and it'd be foolish to think otherwise.
Yeah, if you don't have the support of the empire, then the Aryans will conquer you.
Yeah. So. Anyway, so 6 and 7. Anything you mentioned icons earlier, but
6 it was a big one for me. So 6 made Council 4 make sense.
Okay.
So Council 4 seems super weird because there don't seem to be a whole lot of practical ramifications. And Council 6 was an attempt at unifying the churches again.
Okay.
There was a trend to say that Jesus only had one will, a divine will. And the rationale was that our human wills could not withstand temptation.
Okay.
That the human will can't do that. That's not something the human will can do. So he absorbs most of humanity, but the human will and the divine will are incompatible because the human will wants sin, the divine will wants righteousness. And they were hoping that because the Oriental Orthodox believed that Jesus only had one will, that he had one nature, that would be friendly to them and they could start dialogues again. And some dialogues did happen as a way to try to get the churches to merge back again.
Yeah.
Ultimately, the council was called to see if this is even allowable. Can Jesus only have one will? And the answer is no. So monothelitism is the idea that Jesus only has one will, and because Jesus has two natures, they do demand that he has two wills.
Okay.
So
like when he was tempted, he really was tempted.
right, he was tempted in his human nature,
but he did not sin.
But God was not tempted because God's nature is untemptable.
Okay.
But can you say Jesus was tempted? Yes, because there's one person. Right. So all of this strings together.
Gotcha.
And it made the White Tuggy debate super interesting to watch.
Yeah. Well, and again, Dr. White's assertion, and he did write a book about the Trinity, the Forgotten Trinity, and he has come under attack, I think unfairly, from some of his Reformed Baptist friends who, going back to Aquinas, going back to Aristotle, kind of have a divine simplicity view that I think kind of limits the diversity within the three persons of the Godhead. But that said, one of the things he'll say a lot is Unitarianism is assumed. It's rarely actually argued for, but it's assumed. And so if you basically say, well, God cannot, right, then that's assuming Unitarianism. So God cannot take on human flesh. God, anyway, so then you have to make these distinctions. Well, yes, we agree that God, that there are certain aspects of God that are impossible, but there are things that humans can do. So if God can take on human flesh, then God can die on a cross, for example, right. or God can be tempted, understanding that God is a generic word, and what we're not saying the Father was tempted, we're saying the Son was tempted in his human flesh, which he had to become to die for the sins of the world. Right. So it's all about making distinctions.
Right.
So the God blob, as we've talked about in a previous episode, is not helpful. We want to use specificity when we're talking about the persons of the Trinity. Right.
So that one of the Trinity suffered from Council 5.
Gotcha.
It ends up being super important as a way to talk about this.
Gotcha.
In Council 6, they're trying to merge back with the Oriental Orthodox.
Does it work?
It does not.
Bummer.
And so they continued to make attempts, actually, but all communication stopped after Islam, which is almost immediately after Council 6. Okay. Yeah. So Council 6 is the last council before Islam. Islam shows up after Council 6.
And if you've ever watched one of those maps of the spread of Islam, it's pretty fast and pretty.
Yeah. So what's the word for it? Like the helplessness, the daunting map of the time. Would have shown pagan barbarians to the north, Muslims to the east, south, and west.
Wow.
And then you just have like pockets of Christianity again. Yeah. Wow. It's pretty bad.
It's interesting because I think a lot of us think, kind of Europe, all becomes Christian,
Oh yeah. I thought that too. Yeah. And it in no way matches the history. Like it takes hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years.
Yeah.
Islam is in France before Christianity is in Scandinavia.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Wow. Interesting. I would never have guessed that.
Yeah. There's more importance about Council 6 that I definitely don't want to gloss over. So there is the interpretation of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane ends up being wonderfully informative at this point. So usually we think that when Jesus says, "Not my will, but your will be done," it's the Son talking to the Father.
Yeah,
that's not the point of the councils here. So it's actually Jesus's human nature talking to his divine nature, because there's one nature of God, and that one nature means that God only has one mind and one will, even though he's three persons. So there is a very popular idea of social Trinitarianism that says that there are three minds of God, and they all have individual intellects and individual wills. So one of the examples that was given on the podcast was that if your dad makes you dinner and you say, "Thank you, Mom," that's super weird.
Yeah.
And it is weird, but that's because there's two wills.
Gotcha.
And there's not because there's two persons.
Okay.
If it's the same actor, if it's the same one agent, one active working principle.
Yeah.
That's also dealt with in Sixth Council, monoenergism. If there's only one, then it's the same being that you're saying thank you to.
Gotcha.
The reason that the Miaphysites demand that Jesus have one nature is so that way, demand that he has one nature is because they think he only has one will. And that's the issue, that Jesus needs two wills in order to actually make human choices, in order to actually redeem our human will.
Gotcha.
That's now suddenly Council 4 is super important.
And just to be really clear, hopefully people understand that the issue is so important because Jesus is only a suitable substitute if he is
fully
God,
human,
human,
and fully God,
So that's why we keep stressing this. I can tell my computer is struggling to keep up because we're going kind of long here. So let's wrap up with number 7.
All right, number 7 is super simple. So Islam shows up between 6 and 7. Islam is super influential, and Islam conquers most of the areas that they were hoping to reunify back into the empire and back into Christianity. It very quickly becomes very easily understandable that they're not converting anytime soon. So in response to Islam, we get iconoclasm. And iconoclasm just says that we should not have icons. So if you have a crucifix, which is a cross that has Jesus on it, those weren't allowed anymore. The artwork, like stained glass that depicts saints or things like that, not allowed anymore.
That's in the West.
It's mostly in the East, next to Islam.
Oh, okay.
Because Islam doesn't do any of these things.
Okay.
Islamic mosque is pretty because of the geometry and architecture.
Okay.
A Christian church is pretty because of iconography.
Gotcha.
Like the architecture was only built so that way we could sing. Like that's why we built high walls and things like that, right? So it became a popular trend to kind of agree with Islam a little bit and say that it's fine if you don't have, or it's good not to have icons. That second commandment says don't make graven images, and all of these things are graven images. So we get a bunch of emperors that are iconoclasts as well. So this is not resolved quickly. We get again bishops fighting over what the church should look like, because there were plenty of icons in ancient church. It's one of the like sculpture was an easy art form, and they'd have all sorts of different sculptures, and there was some remnants in the West after the council, but really it was pretty much once they had the council, it was pretty well decided that icons don't have any sort of second commandment violation here. That you're and in particular, the notable theology is that it doesn't talk about praying to them or praying for saints for intercession. It's only talking about them for decoration.
Okay.
Yeah. The idea of using them as part of the worship was for beautification.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, and this is still some of those issues are still debated today. For example, when I have our debates, I take our crucifix and I take it out of the sanctuary because I know it would be an offense to many of the, say, Reformed Baptists there, for example, or maybe any Baptist or any Calvinist. So, so the degree to which certain images can be used, and I would argue that if you watch that video I just mentioned, for example, that author, that speaker, the filmmaker talks about how he thinks there is a reverence of the icon in an idolatrous way still going on in Eastern Orthodoxy. So there's like the icon is like a conduit almost.
So of course, you and I are both Protestants. We do think that icons can be used in idolatrous ways.
Yeah. I mean, I have several of them, so I think they can also be fine.
I only have one. I've got my one John the Baptist one, and that's it. That's the only one I have.
But I never like look at it or pray to it or talk to it.
Yeah, I'm not even facing it while I'm praying. Like this, let alone thinking about it.
Yeah, and I understand it's not art either. They don't call it art. I understand it's not that. They actually consider it a writing, and the way that they are created is like, it's more like writing. But that said, so I think that is still an issue to this day. But let's call it a wrap there. I can tell my poor computer, it's running out of hard drive space, and it's just struggling to keep up here. Where can people find you to learn more, or I don't know, come argue with you about this? Maybe they're like, I'm a monophysite or whatever it is. And
so I will very likely soon create a YouTube page for my philosophy classes.
Okay.
I need to create some videos for my students that I can't find good ones on YouTube. But I haven't done that yet. So right now you can only find me at Missio Dei Anglican Church, or you can find me at Theology by the Pint. I'm here on air, and I'm here for most of the events too.
Cool. So Evan Friske, or as they used to say, Friske.
Friske.
Okay. I'm Evan McClanahan, pastor at First Lutheran, flhouston.org. Check us out there. Sarah would want me to remind you as well. Check out theologybythepint.org to find out about current events, or upcoming events, I should say, and how to donate toward the cause to help us be financially sustainable as our standalone 501c3. So do check that out. We'd greatly appreciate it. Until next time, we encourage you to question freely, think deeply, and disagree as needed.